Coming up on our newscast. Three-way talks between leaders of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo are expected to be held on the sidelines of the NATO Summit. Japanese media report the first such session in over 4 years will likely happen on Wednesday. North Korea's leader held a meeting with senior military officials. Kim Jong-un reportedly approved new duties for the frontline army and discussed a change in war tactics. Following a powerful earthquake, Afghanistan reports more than 1,100 deaths. With many people missing, efforts to find survivors are ongoing. Hello, we're wrapping up the week well. I'm Daniel Che here to bring the latest. Let's begin with our top story. Efforts are ongoing to prepare a trilateral session between the leaders of Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo on the sidelines of the NATO summit next week. According to some Japanese media, it will likely take place on Wednesday. Min Soo-hyun starts us off.
South Korea, the U.S., and Japan are likely to hold three-way talks on the sidelines of next week's NATO summit. The meeting is likely to be held on Wednesday, the 29th, at the start of the two-day summit in Madrid, Spain. Japan's Asahi Shimbun reported on Friday that the Japanese government is making final adjustments for it to be held on that date. That's the likely timing also according to an official from Seoul's presidential office who stressed, though, that there's not yet been a final decision. This would be the first top-level meeting between the three countries in more than 4 years. It will also be the first trilateral meeting between South Korean President Yoon and his U.S. and Japanese counterparts, Joe Biden and Fumio Kishida. The three are expected to discuss regional security issues, including North Korea's repeated provocations amid expectations of a seventh nuclear test. Bilateral talks between Seoul and Tokyo, however, still appear unlikely. Japan's Asahi Shimbun said that the Japanese government is reluctant because it does not believe South Korea has concrete plans to address bilateral issues, such as Japan's subjection of Koreans to wartime forced labor. Other Japanese media also report that while an official summit between Yoon and Kishida is being put on hold, it does appear possible for them to have short, so-called pull-aside talks. On the sidelines of the summit, South Korea also plans to hold bilateral talks with about 10 other countries to discuss a wide range of topics, including nuclear power, semiconductors, and renewable energy. Min Soo-hyun, Arirang News.
BRICS members issued the Beijing Declaration at their annual 14th summit. Among topics discussed, they pledged support for the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Chung Eun-ju has the details.
At their 14th annual summit on Thursday in Beijing, the BRICS member nations adopted and released the Beijing Declaration, stressing solidarity and cooperation to further strengthen strategic partnerships. One of the top agenda items included in the declaration was the bloc's support for the Korean peninsula's denuclearization, reaffirming commitment to a comprehensive, peaceful, diplomatic, and political solution. Made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the theme for this year's BRICS summit, held virtually and led by Chinese President Xi Jinping, was centered on fostering high-quality partnerships and ushering in a new era for global development. It also included consensus on safeguarding peace and security, reforming global governance, combating COVID-19, promoting economic recovery, and sustainable development. It was also the first time Russian President Vladimir Putin attended a forum with the heads of major economies since invading Ukraine earlier this year. The bloc supported talks between Russia and Ukraine and voiced concerns over the conflict's humanitarian situation, but didn't comment on the sanctions slapped on Russia by the West. President Xi had condemned U.S.-led Western sanctions against Russia ahead of the summit on Wednesday in a business forum, calling them boomerang and a double-edged sword that are weaponizing the global economy. However, there have been reports that each of the BRICS leaders hold varying levels of interest regarding Russian sanctions, and Brazil, India, and South Africa ultimately disagreed with China and Russia. The BRICS nations further said they opposed green trade barriers that could restrict global trade and called for reforms to international bodies such as the UN Security Council, World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund, with hopes of further enhancing BRICS solidarity. Meanwhile, 2 U.S.-led multilateral mechanisms where the world's most advanced economies will meet, G7 and NATO, are to be held later this month. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
On Saturday, the nation will mark 72 years since the start of the Korean War. Ahead of that anniversary, President Yoon invited veterans to a luncheon to thank them for defending the country and liberal democracy.
오늘 우리가 누리고 있는 대한민국의 자유와 평화, 번영은 국군과 유엔군 참전 용사의 피와 땀, 희생과 헌신 위에 이룩한 것입니다. 자유의 가치를 믿는 세계의 젊은이들과 함께 자유를 지켜냈습니다.
Invited to the event were some 200 people, including UN veterans who took part in the war, the descendants of veterans, diplomatic delegations, and USFK. President Yoon cited the successful launch of the country's first domestically produced space rocket, an achievement made possible by the vets who defended the country. He pledged more efforts to excavate the remains of soldiers killed in the war and to fulfill South Korea's role on the global stage in defending freedom. To 5 UN veterans from the U.S., the Philippines, Canada, and Ethiopia, he awarded the Apostle of Peace medal. North Korea's leader wrapped up a 3-day meeting with senior military officials. During the session, Kim Jong-un approved new duties for the regime's frontline army and discussed a change in war tactics. Bae Eun-ji tells us more.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has ordered his top military officials to strengthen the regime's defense capabilities. The North state-run media KCNA reported Friday that Kim presided over a 3-day meeting from June 21st to 23rd and approved plans to provide what was referred to as a military guarantee to strengthen the regime's war deterrent. Also during the meeting, North Korea made a rare mention of revising its war tactics. The state media said Pyongyang has decided to bolster the duties of its frontline units with an important military action plan. But it did not offer any further details. The latest meeting has been closely watched amid speculation that Pyongyang has been preparing to conduct its first nuclear test in 5 years. But state media did not mention anything about its nuclear program being discussed in the meeting. South Korea's Unification Ministry said it will continue to keep a close eye on the situation in the north.
State media reports of the meeting did not directly mention anything about a nuclear test. But because the North did announce that it has reviewed and approved an important plan to strengthen war deterrence, our government will closely monitor the situation while being prepared for all possibilities.
Some analysts say that the North's latest decision to revise war plans and add frontline army duties apparently targets South Korea. It's possible that North Korea could deploy its tactical nuclear weapons, such as its short-range ballistic missiles like KN-23s or KN-24s, to its frontline artillery units. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Elsewhere around the world, the official death tally from this week's powerful earthquake in Afghanistan has risen to 1,150. Locals are reportedly still digging through rubble with bare hands to find survivors. Kim Yeon-sung has the latest.
The death toll from Afghanistan's devastating earthquake has climbed to around 1,150. The official tally was reported by the state-run Bakhtar news agency on Friday. The Taliban director of the agency also said that around 1,600 people have been injured. But some say the actual figures are much higher.
Around 1,500 to 1,700 people have been martyred, and the number of wounded victims is around 2,500 people.
The 5.9 magnitude quake struck southeastern Afghanistan in the early hours of Wednesday. Official in charge of disaster relief had said that around 10,000 homes have been destroyed.
This is my house. It's destroyed completely. All house belongings have been missing. I have lost 12 members of my family in this house.
The worst affected regions are now covered in rubble. AFP reported that survivors are struggling to find equipment among the debris to bury the dead. Another news agency, AP, said that villagers are digging by hand to find survivors.
There was nobody from the health department, and everybody was doing rescue activities on their own. Children were trapped under the debris, and I went back and got them out.
A magnitude 4.3 aftershock on Friday killed 5 more people. But Taliban authorities earlier on Friday officially ended the search for more survivors. A senior local official also told Reuters that the country lacks the medical supplies to treat those injured. Some international aid organizations are rushing to help, but they're struggling to find a way in with the lack of proper roads and communication lines down in Afghanistan. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
The U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan gun control bill that's been called the most significant related legislation in almost 3 decades. If passed and signed into law, it would enhance background checks for gun buyers under the age of 21. It will also ban the purchase of guns by those convicted of abusing partners they dated in the last 5 years, closing the so-called boyfriend loophole. The bill was prompted by 2 mass shootings last month by teenagers. 10 people were killed at a grocery store in New York State. 19 children and 2 adults were killed at an elementary school in Texas. According to U.S. media, while some Republicans may vote against it, the bill is expected to pass the Democrat-controlled House. Seoul's foreign ministry officially adopted Turkey's new internationally recognized name, Turkiye. Official notice was sent to all government branches to use this pronunciation. The ministry also changed spelling to Turkiye on its website for the name of the South Korean embassy in that country. This comes weeks after the UN officially decided to recognize the rebranded name. Seoul's current account surplus with many countries around the world grew last year as global trade recovered from the pandemic. South Korea logged an all-time high current account surplus with the U.S. and Southeast Asian nations. Jung helps us look beyond the digits.
In trade last year, South Korea logged an all-time high current account surplus with the United States. Data released by the Bank of Korea on Friday shows that the country's overall current account surplus increased to $88 billion in 2021, up 14% from the previous year. Of that, the current account surplus with the United States stood at around $45 billion. This is up roughly $12 billion, a rise of 40% from a year earlier, surpassing the previous record set in 2014. A Bank of Korea official said the surplus rose as global trade recovered from the pandemic.
As exports showed solid increases led by semiconductors and steel products, the current account surplus expanded. Also, the services account, which usually runs into the red on trade, the deficit was reduced as transport earnings improved.
Also, South Korea's current account surplus with Southeast Asian nations posted a record high figure last year, mainly driven by semiconductors. The figure stood at around $102 billion, up around 30% from the previous year's black, surpassing the $100 billion mark for the first time. The current account surplus with Seoul's top export market, China, also rose on year in 2021. However, one expert says the country is likely to post current account deficits with other countries this year as import prices rise due to soaring commodity prices.
Last year, Korea's current account was in surplus because Korea's semiconductor exports, both in value and volume, rose greatly. But this year, the current account is in deficit because while the semiconductor prices are still relatively high, it is starting to fall. And in addition, the prices of raw materials, especially oil and foodstuff, has been rising very quickly.
Amid rising global oil prices, the country's current account deficit with the Middle East worsened on year, standing at around $48 billion. The shortfall with Japan also rose to around $22 billion last year as South Korea imported more equipment for semiconductor production. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The Fed's rate hike had a major impact on other countries' policies. Nations such as Mexico and India are also raising rates to fight inflation. Developed countries in Europe as well as South Korea are likely to follow suit. Lee Hyun provides a deeper analysis.
Emerging financial markets around the world are reacting to the U.S. Federal Reserve's recent rate hike. Last week's U.S. rate hike of 75 basis points, the largest in decades, led to many currencies losing their value against the dollar.
As we all know, U.S. keep on hiking interest rate, US dollars remain strong, and Asian currencies definitely suffering.
Earlier this month, India's interest rate rose 0.5 percentage points to 4.9%. Citing the minutes of the Monetary Policy Committee's meeting, Bloomberg reported that India is likely to raise interest rates 2 more times this year. The Philippine Central Bank on Thursday also raised the key interest rate by 25 basis points to 2.5%, while mentioning another rate increase in August is possible. Latin American countries are on the same track. Mexico on Thursday increased its benchmark interest rate by a record 75 basis points to 7.75%. The Bank of Mexico said that it could raise them even further to tame inflation, which has surged to over 7.8%, double its original target. Argentina also raised its interest rate last week for the 6th time this year to 52%. That's up 3 percentage points from the previous mark, but the doors open to an additional raise as the government struggles to cool inflation expectations. Developed countries in Europe, meanwhile, are not an exception. UK interest rates rose further last week from 1% to 1.25% as the Bank of England attempts to stem the pace of soaring consumer prices. The European Central Bank earlier this week reiterated its intention to raise interest rates in July and September. Meanwhile, there's a possibility that South Korea could also increase interest rates in the coming months as currency volatility remains. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Top officials at the Coast Guard announced their intention to step down for mishandling the 2020 case of a South Korean official who was shot and killed by North Korean soldiers. The man's family is calling for a classified presidential document to be released to uncover the truth. Lee Kyung-eun has the full story.
Top Coast Guard officials, including Commissioner General Chung Bong-hoon, tendered their resignations on Friday over a controversial case involving a South Korean fisheries official killed by North Korean military 2 years ago. The Coast Guard recently retracted its previous claim that the official was attempting to defect to the North, a crime in South Korea, citing lack of evidence. The presidential office says their resignations will not be approved because the probe is still ongoing. Closely watching the probe are the bereaved family, who had denied from the start that the man had intended to defect. The same day, they met with lawmakers of the ruling People Power Party in the hope of more quickly uncovering the truth, which they believe to have been covered up.
I tried to find out what President Moon was doing 6 hours after my brother was confirmed to be alive. But access to the classified presidential document has been completely denied.
The PPP, backing President Yoon Suk-yeol's own pledge to reinvestigate the case, has repeatedly called for the presidential document's disclosure, citing information from other government agencies.
We found that no rescue order was given by President Moon Jae-in despite the confirmation of his survival, and that the government covered up this case for 1 day.
The Democratic Party is claiming the PPP is trying to take political revenge. The DP instead has proposed that if the PPP really wants to know the truth, that they can consider disclosing ultra-top secret military documents, potentially at the cost of a security breach.
All of our intelligence tactics will be exposed. Is it so important that we can accept that cost to find out how they drew the conclusion that it defected?
To disclose the classified presidential document will require the support of at least 2/3 of the National Assembly. On Monday, the bereaved family is going to request cooperation from the DP, which holds a majority. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
The number of people in the nation reporting heat-related illnesses this summer is already way above last year's figures. There are concerns of a potential slew of cases in the months to come. Song Yoo-jin explains what can be done to better protect ourselves.
More South Koreans are falling victim to scorching heat this year compared to last year. Data from the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency on Friday shows that the number of patients admitted to emergency rooms for heat-related illnesses over the past month was 163. Although no deaths have been reported so far, that's an increase of more than 70% from the same period last year. Demographic-wise, those in their 50s and older made up almost half of the tally. In terms of workplace, around half of the patients worked outdoors, such as on farms. The largest number of patients reported on a single day was 23 on June 22nd, when temperatures reached around 35 degrees Celsius. Common symptoms of heat-related illnesses such as heat stroke and heat exhaustion include headache, dizziness, muscle spasms, and fatigue. So how can we protect ourselves from the heat?
If you feel like it's too hot or that your heart is pounding too fast, you need to find a cool place immediately. You must take regular breaks if you're working at a place with poor ventilation or wearing tight clothes. When working outside when temperatures are high, you should work in pairs so that you can help each other out when feeling sick.
But this is not something only South Korea is struggling with. According to the World Health Organization, more than 166,000 people died due to heat waves from 1998 to 2017. But this number is expected to rise further due to climate change. 송유진, Arirang News.
On Tuesday, South Korea successfully launched its homegrown space rocket and put a satellite into orbit. President Yoon called it the product of 3 decades of effort. Our Kim Do-yeon and Han Sung-woo were on the historic site. Here's a video log of their coverage.
All right, this is going to be your first rocket launch. How are you feeling?
Very excited, a bit nervous actually. We're going to be on site for a historic launch, right? The second launch of Nuri. It's something I've only seen in the movies, Tom Hanks, Apollo 13, but to actually be there, what an exciting experience it'll be.
All right, let's go.
All right.
Despite all this excitement, about an hour into the drive south, we got some news. The Korea Aerospace Research Institute decided to push back the launch by 24 hours due to the weather, just minutes before Arirang TV's first newscast of the day.
The scheduled second launch of the Nuri space rocket, which was set to take place on Wednesday, has been delayed to Thursday.
That's right. Today's weather forecast posed obstacles to the transportation of the rocket. And once it's erected, the screening of umbilical cords and connecting the cables could have been dangerous for the engineers.
The engineers also assure the public that there are no problems with the rocket itself. And it showed, as after the 24-hour delay, all steps seem to be on course.
We think it's highly likely the launch will be a success. Then again, there's no guarantee that unexpected variables won't pop up last minute. So we're not letting down our guard.
And the rocket's transportation went smoothly. With hardly any wind, the sun shining bright, and Nuri standing fully upright on its launch pad before Wednesday noon. Then, another sudden announcement a day before liftoff. A glitch detected at around 2 p.m. in the oxidizer level sensor in the rocket's first stage meant Nuri had to be shipped back to where it was assembled.
After trying to figure out the issue at the launch pad, we realized it was not possible to get up close and analyze the problem while it's standing up. That's why we decided it's impossible to carry out the launch at the moment.
But just when it seemed as though it would be postponed for several weeks, Nuri's launch was suddenly back on.
At first, we thought Nuri's first and second stages would have to be separated to replace the problematic sensor itself, but researchers at the Korea Aerospace Research Institute, after close examination, found the issue could be solved by replacing just one key part that was malfunctioning.
Removing the need to disassemble the rocket and allowing the country to launch Nuri within its alternative launch window, ending June 23rd. And so it happened. One more trip to the launch pad, fuel injection, pre-launch operation, and finally 3, 2, 1, liftoff. With a roar, the ground shook before Nuri, powered by its 75-ton liquid fuel engines, blasted into space.
Now, Sung-woo, what a sight that was. I mean, Nuri blasting off into space. I imagine the NATO Space Center was in high spirits and currently is in high spirits right now.
The 3-stage space rocket, after reaching its target altitude of 700 kilometers, placed both its performance verification satellite, holding 4 functioning mini-cube satellites, and its 1.3-ton dummy satellite into orbit, 70 seconds apart at around 4:15 p.m. Claps of joy ensued, and an hour later, the Korea Aerospace Research Institute and the Ministry of Science and ICT held a joint presser on site, declaring mission accomplished.
Nuri reached its target altitude and successfully placed a performance satellite into orbit.
With 4 more launches scheduled by 2027, our crew left NATO Space Center the following morning, knowing that though the Nuri project is far from over, South Korea's space endeavors have only just begun.
From the NATO Space Center in Gohung, Jeollanam-do Province,
that was Kim Do-yeon,
Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea will be grappling with sweltering temperatures again tomorrow. Most regions will see daytime highs surpassing 30 degrees Celsius. Because of the humid air conditions will feel hotter than the actual readings. The capital region will see maximum temperatures hiking up to 31 degrees Celsius. Parts of the south will be even hotter with heat wave advisories issued in some regions. In terms of the air quality, clean air is in the forecast nationwide. Most of the rain has now tapered off and clear skies are slowly returning. But the monsoonal rain front will linger across the south of the country until Sunday. As for the amount of rain, Jeju Island can expect up to 120 millimeters of rainfall. The south coast can see 5 to 20 millimeters. Morning lows in Seoul and Gyeongju will be starting off at 21 degrees Celsius. Daytime highs will be 2 to 5 degrees higher than today. Chuncheon will get up to 31 degrees, Gyeongju 33, Gwangju will reach 29 degrees. Next Monday, the Seoul metropolitan area in Gangwon-do province will see another round of monsoon rain. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
It's time to wrap things up. As always, thank you for staying with us.